they acquired our entire product design archive.
Wow, that's
So
exciting.
yeah, it's there. That's something we're really proud of and excited about. And they'll do like an exhibition about toasters, and our toaster will be a part of it. They'll do an
That's awesome.
exhibition about medical devices, and they'll have our medical stuff. And then they're still planning. They had an exhibition at when they first acquired a small one, but then the big one hasn't happened yet.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Right. I guess we'll get going.
All right.
Let me just kick it off real quick, Brian, then I'm going to turn it over to you, and then you can turn it over to Ben. Ben, just on behalf of Averett University, we are honored and thrilled to have you here today. Class super appreciates it. We have a class of about 14 students. There's going to be about 30 on here eventually. But we're super excited. This, as Brian set up, was part of the Four Corners. Everyone's got an update and a link to your website, and I've gone and taken a look. So let me turn over to Brian, who actually set this all up. And Brian, as we say each week, we're so thankful for you pulling your friends together, such distinguished friends, and to making this class special. So let me turn it over to Brian.
I appreciate the kind words, John. So again, guys, this is the fourth of the Four Corners of innovation and launching a business idea, whether you guys decide to launch a company or a product. And probably, and again, I know this is recorded, so I'll get in trouble for this, but probably one of the most important. I had the absolute honor of working with Ben and Michael Graves and his team on a few projects in the past. And what an honor it was, because I learned so much in 7 minutes in a meeting in Princeton, New Jersey. We were discussing all kinds of projects, but one of the interesting things that I came away with was when the team at Michael Graves said, well, what other things do you have coming down the pipeline? We were working with the government of New Zealand at the time. And I said, well, he said, nothing really interesting, no consumer devices. I said, right now, they've just sent us a rib spreader, which is a surgical device. And I'll never forget, Michael Graves looked up and he said, is somebody going to buy it? And I said, well, hopefully, yeah. He goes, then it's a consumer device. And it really set in my mind that everything that we work on, that whether it's a piece of software or anything, if somebody's going to buy it, it's a consumer device, and you have to design it and think about it to match the experiential expectation of that consumer. And the closer aligned you can get to that, to your target audience and above, is going to be the success of your product or the success of your company. And one of the other things that, and again, I don't know if Ben will mention it, but Michael shared his story of how he got into designing medical devices and stuff, and it came from an unhappy thing that he turned into a real strength. And it was interesting that it kind of taught me that regardless of what people think they want, that doesn't matter as much of what they need. And Ben and his team focus on what people need. And they balance that with what they're asking for, what they think they need at the time, and it really makes a difference. And it goes from being able to advocate for functionality in form versus form or functionality, and these kind of things. And I've tried to carry that forward in everything I've done since those meetings many years ago. And Ben, I just got to point out too, Ben has not aged in the last, 10 years, but, I certainly have. And he'll have to maybe give us a pointer on that too. I don't know what's going on there, but it's great to see him again. And I think you guys will really enjoy this part of the course. So with that, Ben, I don't want to even discredit you by trying to flub through your background. So why don't you go ahead and take it from here?
Sure. Well, Brian, thank you. And for the class, thank you for the opportunity. And, I'm going to walk through a deck. And please, it's hard remotely, but let's make it a conversation. If there's ever, a question or anything, if I skip over something or if I'm not being clear, feel free, raise your hand, interrupt. Let's make it a conversation. And I just say, Brian, what we're always looking for, we do design consultancy, is enlightened clients. So people who really get it. And, Brian, have not worked together in a long time, to hear the way you describe our interactions and the impact. You continue to be an enlightened client. And if there was only more of you in the world, I guess now there hopefully will be as this class graduates. Yeah, good to reconnect, and I'm really happy to be here. So what I'm going to do for the next hour plus is talk with you guys about the product design methodology, the process that we use. And we'll go through some case studies and hopefully help you guys get a sense of what we do, and hopefully help you understand how you can do it and realize that as you see from around me, there's a lot of different products surrounding me. They're all basically designed the same way. You don't have to be an expert at a type of product or a business. You have to be, I think, an expert at a process, and in all forms of business. That's what makes Burger King different from McDonald's, is the process they use to make hamburgers. So I think that's one, everything in business, I think, is systems and process. And that's what I'm going to hopefully walk you guys through now.
Hey, Ben, real quick, could you a little bit your background and how you got into this? It's that's 80% of the intrigue here is about yourself and your background. If you could.
That's like 5 slides ahead. I promise I'll get to that.
Okay, good. All right, good.
So I want to start before talking about me, but talking about my colleague, mentor, boss, friend, Michael Graves. He was at one point the most famous architect in the world, and then he believed that he was known for expanding the role of the architect in society. Pretty heady stuff, because he didn't accept the fact that architects designed buildings. He believed architects designed everything that go in buildings and surround buildings that affect the person. So I just want to make sure you guys can still see the screen, right? You see Michael's face? Cool. So this quote of his, I like to share, it's, good design is both appearance and functionality together. It's the experience that makes a good design. So a lot of people talk about form and function, and Michael covers that in the first sentence, but it's really that second one, and Brian has already touched on it, but it's about the experience that makes it good. So try to keep that in your mind as we go through this talk. So we'll start with some of the fundamentals. The word ordinary. What does that mean? So a quick Google definition, it's with no special or distinctive features, normal, commonplace, standard. Pretty obvious, as opposed to extraordinary. So if we think about extraordinary, what does that mean? So going beyond what is usual, regular, customary, or exceptional. And for Michael Graves' design, that's really what we see as our mission. Take the ordinary and make it extraordinary. So what do we mean by that? This is a tea kettle, boils water, couldn't be any more vanilla. Probably a lot of people, if I say tea kettle, it's what you think of. Whereas this is a Michael Graves tea kettle. We think of it as extraordinary. And hopefully at first glance you kind of get that, but let me go a little further. Remember, form, function, and experience. So actually the form, the shape of the tea kettle with that cone shape with the big base, it actually makes the water boil faster. It is exposing more surface area to the heat, so it's going to be a better product in its core function of boiling water. But that's not enough. That's the form, but now let's also think, or that's the function. Think about the beyond the form, the handle. We use metaphor a lot. We want people to intuitively understand. Products that need instruction are kind of a failure a lot of the time. So the handle is blue, so it's cool to the touch. It's also, the shape of it is very thoughtful, so it's comfortable. Then the whistle, it's red. Again, it's using metaphor. It's going to tell you that it's going to be hot. You're going to want to be aware of that. But again, even all of that isn't really getting into the experience the way that we think a product should. So we've got a little video here. You see the flame. This is my stovetop. Oh, and the video's not going. We can hear it. There we go. Let me see if I can restart it so we don't get the drama. As the water boils, the steam comes out of the whistle. It makes the nice whistle sound. But then it's like, how can we push it a little further? How can we make it more fun, make it a better experience? So we have this little spinner up front. It's called the spinning whistle kettle. Informally, we call it the Dorothy kettle, named after the Wizard of Oz. But it's just this type of expression that shows it boils water, maybe a little better than the other one, but it's that experience that makes it stand out and differentiate, and a product that can stay on the shelves. You can get recognition, your brand can be known when you're making extraordinary products. So the last kind of intro slide, Brian told the story that Michael said everything's a consumer product, but the way Brian was thinking about it is the normal definition. A consumer product is a product that's bought by an individual or a household for personal use. But as Michael said, like, if you're using it, if you're a person, it is a consumer product. And that's what we think about. So to answer the question about myself, I'm Ben Wintner. I am the CEO of Michael Graves Design. I've worked at the company now 21 years. Before joining the company, I was a proprietary equity trader. So out of college, I was day trading the NASDAQ. And my first year, it was so exciting. I couldn't sleep at night. The market was moving so much. It was like you could make unlimited money. And the NASDAQ was the biggest story in the news. Everyone to talk to me about it. Then 9/11 happened, and the stock market stopped moving. And I would go to work the same way. I would trade the open, I would trade the close, and I would just sit there the rest of the day, hoping not to make a mistake, waiting for news. And within the first 2 years of my career, I saw the importance of when you love your job and how exciting life is, and when you don't love your job, how hard life is. And then from there, I had the opportunity to kind of reevaluate. I was interested in business and real estate. I knew someone at Michael Graves, and they said, we really need help in our finance department. Will you come and work with us here? So I started kind of at the bottom of the company in the accounting and finance department. But that was so great because I learned the kind of the skeleton of the business, learning the numbers and going out from there. Before that, as I said here, I went to the University of Michigan, where I loved college sports and the Michigan experience. But then Michael approached me and said, Ben, if you can get an MBA, a good MBA, I will support you. So we're in Princeton, New Jersey. So that meant Philadelphia and New York. I got into Columbia, and I got my MBA, studied finance. That's kind of what Columbia is known for, and what I was doing. But I really then got exposed to and introduced to the other parts of the company. And I was mostly interested in kind of marketing and business development and really being front-facing general management. And I worked on the architecture side, the product design side, but really found my footing in the product side of the business. And that's what I run now. But at the same time, that's me at work. But again, back to we're still people at home. I live in Brooklyn Heights with my wife and our 2 children and our standard poodle, Millie. I'm a runner. So, as all entrepreneurs, I'm never done working. I'm always thinking. So when I'm on the right side of the screen, I'm at work. But then when I'm at work, I'm also a dad and, a person. So to that whole point, regardless of the product, if it is the most consumer-facing product or a rib spreader, that person who's buying it, they never are not a consumer. They're always a person, but a lot of companies don't think about it. So I think if you have that perspective, it can fundamentally give a competitive advantage. So that's me. And so for us, the way we define a consumer product is really any product designed with the people at the forefront. And then we want it to obviously work flawlessly, but we want it to delight you. And that comes with special details that are going to make it work better, but then also have that character and personality. Well, it's the spinning whistle or some other touch point. If you think about the charge of product design and launching products for a business through that filter, I think you'll find that you are differentiated and, making a name for yourself in a way that a lot of companies just don't think about. So with that sort of intro on me and the high level of what the talk's going to be about, I can go through more of the firm background unless anyone has any further, questions or topics I should touch on before we keep going.
They're all shaking, go.
Cool. So background about the company. So Michael Graves Design, We are the product design part of the Michael Graves company. And we're lucky we don't specialize in a type of product. So we design everything from the furniture that's on the court at the US Open. So the player benches and the chair umpire. Every August and September is our favorite time of the year because we get to watch the tournament and see our stuff, to watches and everything in between, ceiling fans, tea kettles, wheelchairs, bathroom products. As long as you've got a process and you're thoughtful about it, there's no reason why you have to specialize in any type of product. We also don't just stop at the product. We also focus on branding and graphic design. So when you've got a product that is expressive, you want the customer experience to be thoughtful in that same way. So we do logo development, packaging design, UI, UX when we're doing electronic products. Down in the bottom corner, that's called planogramming. So when we started working with retailers, you realize for the merchant, the buyer, that's their world, is like, what does that display look like that a shopper is going to see? So we had to figure out how to make that pop and tell that brand story. So we do that type of design work as well. And it came out of, as I said earlier, an architecture practice. So there's a sister company that does architecture, interior design, and they don't specialize in a type of product. So if anyone's been to Disney World, Michael famously designed the Dolphin and Swan hotels, but then we also do office buildings and private residences. And it's just really trying to think through how people are going to live and work in that space, and how can the design decisions you make lead to a satisfying experience for people. Michael, as I said, was an architect, but wanted to design everything. And historically, that was common. So Frank Lloyd Wright, the most famous American architect of all time, didn't just design the building, he designed the furniture, the interiors. He was known to design, when he did a house, he would want to design the like housewife's clothing. There's an interesting book that was written comparing Michael and Frank Lloyd Wright, called Kings of Infinite Space. If you're interested in that, you can pick that up. We started to design products that went into buildings. That's known as contract product design. So it was things that were specified by architects, interior designers. So it was like plumbing products and furniture and door hardware. And again, that was because it made sense for clients. Oh, well, an architect can design those things, until we started to have more success. And then we started to get commissions on consumer products, as people say, products for individuals, but it was only at the luxury level. Those were the companies that were investing in design. So for distributions at like Bloomingdale's and Barney's, we worked with Alessi and Steuben and Tiffany, really high-end luxury products. And it was interesting, the first product that Michael did for Alessi was a sterling silver tea service, and even he couldn't afford to buy it. But that was who was hiring designers. And then this product down here, this Whistling Bird tea kettle, is our most famous product, best-selling product of all time. And similarly to the Target one I showed you, it had that cone shape. And this, the metaphor was the bird. So when it would whistle, it was like you think about the rooster in the morning, and people talked about how it transformed the breakfast experience. So it wasn't just about boiling water, making tea, but it was like, how can a kettle actually have that bigger impact? And it's been their #1 seller for most of the last 30 years. And we got to surround that, once we established that design language, with a lot of other products that you see there. So it's another very point of pride. And it led to probably our most important relationship, which is Target. So in 1997, Target was the #3 discount mass market retailer behind Walmart and Kmart. And they realized they couldn't compete with Walmart on price. Kmart was starting to have some corporate issues of their own, and Target was nipping at their heels, but they really weren't really differentiated and didn't have a strategy to beat Walmart. And their cause marketing department had the brilliant idea, as they were opening their first stores in the Washington, D.C. area, they decided to pay for the restoration of the Washington Monument. because Washington, D.C. doesn't have voting members of Congress. They never had people that were like slipping in projects into others to pay for things. So there was a lot of government buildings that had overdue maintenance. So Target funded the restoration, and the brilliance of Target, they said, how can we make the monument better during restoration than before or after? And they said, let's hire Michael Graves to design the scaffolding. So we got to design the scaffolding. We had all these great metaphors. A big part of the restoration was the repointing of the stone. So you can see in this photograph, we made scaffolding that adhered to the obelisk and then was wrapped in fabric that told that story. It was so popular and successful that the president called Michael and asked him to call Target to ask them to continue to fund the restoration, or keep the scaffolding up. Even by December of '99, the project was done. They wanted it up for the Millennium Celebration because it was going to be more important, and it was all of a sudden illuminated all the way up rather than just those kind of creepy red lights at the top to prevent planes from crashing into it. So it was just super exciting project. One day we were having a project meeting in our Princeton office. The Target executives flew in, and the National Park Service, who run the monument, were taking the train up from DC. And if anyone who's traveled the Northeast Corridor, you won't be surprised to learn the train was delayed. So we had the Target executives, sort of this captive audience, and it was an architecture meeting, but we brought them across the street to the room I'm surrounded by now. And we also had a tiny little company store and showed them some of the product design that we had worked on, some of the stuff that I was showing here, the high-end luxury stuff. So they're like, oh, this is so cool. Maybe we could do something. And really at the time, Target was a subsidiary of a department store company called Dayton Hudson. So like maybe we could have some Michael Graves products in some of our department stores. Come out, let's have a meeting. And as luck would have it, at lunch, the new chief merchant for the home department came to the lunch at Target, so not the department store. He came to the lunch and he said, guys, I got to ask you something. Why is it that it's Italian companies like Alessi who differentiate with product design? Ron had just come back from a European trade show, scouting out new product. And he said, I've got Chinese factories lined up who will make anything. Michael, would you design products for us that we could sell at affordable prices that you couldn't get anywhere else? And all of a sudden, we have a real differentiator from Walmart. They can compete on price. We can compete on design. And Michael was like, I love that idea. My designers, we can't afford these expensive products. And from a design perspective, it doesn't cost more to design an expensive product. Let's design great products for everybody. So that transformed retailing. If you Google it, it made retail history. And it changed customers' expectations. They talked about it being the democratization of design, or design for all. And Target is the best marketing company in the world. So we benefited from all of that. And over time, we designed more than 2,500 products across 30 different categories of the home department. Ron Johnson, whose brilliant idea it was, got on the radar of Steve Jobs, who then hired Ron to leave Target and start Apple Retail, which ended up being the most profitable retail business in the world. It was Ron's idea to have the Genius Bar. But we got the opportunity to bring design to the masses and work at all these categories. So our tea kettle for Alessi that now sells for more than $200, at the time was like $150, we got to design kettles that cost $25. And it was based on not being made in Italy, but being made in China. And the volume, rather than sell, a couple thousand tea kettles a year, at Target, we're selling tens of thousands of tea kettles a year. And we got to just bring, work on so many different types of products, so satisfying. But then we also, not only did we design the products, but we designed the packaging. And we worked with Target's brilliant advertising team to design ads. And then that's when we really learned about this idea of planogramming. And before we worked at Target, mass market, products were not left out. We coined the term perfect placement because everything was in a box and consumers couldn't touch and feel it. So we had to figure out how can you do that in a way that the stuff's not going to get broken and not going to get lost, but shoppers can actually touch and feel the products. So we did this planogram that we plotted and unraveled at a meeting. And at this point, Ron's replacement, Steve Berkey, was like, let's do it. That's brilliant. Let's try it. So it's, again, finding those enlightened clients who are really trying to make a statement. They're brave because they're willing to try things that haven't been done. But I think what really sells it is it always goes back to the person. But like your shopper, when they come in, how do they know what the handle on the cookware is going to feel like? Like this is going to really transform the customer experience. But then you got to get the products on shelf, on time, and on budget. So we worked with, literally hundreds of factories all over the world. Our design team would go, and it is like not glorious work, but it is so satisfying when you go on a factory floor and you see your products coming out and you work through all those details. A lot of people think about creativity as like the napkin sketch, the upfront work. And that is really satisfying, but creativity, a lot of people also think of like creatives are the artists of the world, but there's creative accountants, some that have, go to jail because of how creative they are with their accounting. But it's about problem solving. And there's no field where creativity isn't key. And I think, I'd be interested to hear, maybe we can talk about this at the end, when you guys were talking about AI and artificial intelligence, what that's really good at, as I understand it, is sorting through the old work that's been done and, helping connect those dots. But I believe it's creativity that is going to keep people, all of us, employed way into the future in a way that robots are going to facilitate us, but it's the level of creativity that I still think we're generations away from AI taking over those jobs. So I would encourage you to think about yourselves, no matter what your interests are, you are a creative, and really nurture that skill, identify as a creative, whether you are someone who draws or reads or thinks, whatever it is, it's that creative process that goes throughout all of the workflow that makes the difference between really successful people, companies, and products, and less so. So I have this slide here to show, again, it's not about price point. We say that as long as a product is value laden at any price point, customers will value it and they will buy it, and brands can stand in that space. So we've been fortunate to, at the luxury, we work with Dornbracht, a German faucet company. We also work for Delta that we sell at Lowe's. We've done cleaning supplies at Target and JCPenney and Williams-Sonoma, and it's the material. So Williams-Sonoma, we get to use wood. At JCPenney, it's injection molded plastic. But again, the price point and the value proposition, the materials, consumers understand that, and you can work at both those levels. So no matter what the price point is, as long as you're bringing that design thinking mentality, you can really differentiate. Then I think the last background slide is going back to that ordinary extraordinary. So where I showed the tea kettle, these are just a few other examples. We did a toaster, or on the bottom, it's just your typical toaster. Above that, it's the same functional ideas, but if you see, we tell the metaphor of the loaf of bread. So it just makes you smile. But then we also try to find ways, not just have you dial in, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but we've got an LED screen that fills in as the toast is getting more done. Just bring a smile to your face. A toilet bowl brush. People, before we started to design them, they were like something that was hidden. But the reality is they got to be out because you got to use them. So how do you make it look great when it's left out? Don't just think of it as when you're cleaning the toilet. For the most time, it's not even used. And we love this product because we started to get pictures of people, when you see on social media, where people would use the holder as a flower vase for outdoor entertaining. And it's like, if you're making a toilet bowl brush that's good looking enough that people put flowers into it, we've done our job. We do a lot of medical products, which I'm going to go through in more detail, but people think about the commode, it's like, it's the worst product if you have to use one. And the way we think about it is like, all right, first it's a piece of furniture. So, this one here, you don't even know what it is. I have to show the little thumbnail so you know it is this same type of product, but it is transformed when you reimagine what is its place in the home. And then we loved this project for the US Open. I'm a huge sports fan, and I was most excited, like, oh, we're gonna get to meet Rafa Nadal and like make more comfortable seating. And then once we got into the project, you realize the athletes don't give a damn about the furniture. They're sitting there for like a minute during a crossover thinking about the match. But for this person who is sitting in that chair for like 5 hours and has to climb up into that seat on national television or international television, like, how can you make it more comfortable? So you see this like vertical ladder versus ours, it just has a little bit of a pitch. We talk about the stakeholders and really finding out who are all the people that are interacting with the product to give them the best experience. And that's how you can differentiate and, form your own way in the world. So again, that is the background of who I am, who we are. Next, we're going to go through the process, but this is a good place for me to take a sip of coffee. And if you've got any topics you want to question or any comments, I'm happy to take a little break.
Any questions, anyone?
All right, we'll keep moving. So how do we do it? Again, I love to bring it back to the fundamentals. If you're a product designer, if you're anyone who's creative, if you're anyone really in the world who wants to interact with people, I can't implore enough the importance of empathy. We all kind of know what empathy, we know it's similar to sympathy, but the definition, as I understand and like to use it for empathy, it's the action of understanding, being aware of, and being sensitive to, and then vicariously experiencing the feelings and thoughts of another person. So if you go back to Michael's definition of good design, it's about experience. So as long as you have empathy, you can be a designer. And as long as you nurture those skills, you can design anything. So, another huge takeaway, the importance of empathy. And then again, it is a process. So it's a process that we repeat always on every project. Every project is different. So you have to adjust it, but fundamentally it's pretty much this process that I'm going to talk about and then elucidate with some case studies. Did I hear a comment, or is that just nothing? Okay. So one of the other challenges, you guys know more than me, I'm sure all of your professors use slides, and it's really hard to take complex ideas and make them understandable. And very little in life is linear. So this is the best we've been able to explain the process. So it generally starts with research, then moves into ideation, then moves into execution. But what these the different colors suggest is, while that is sort of how it happens, you need to be thinking about execution from the start. So this green wave comes all the way back to the beginning, where you're thinking about, like, where is this getting made? Is it getting made in Italy? Is it getting made in China? Is it mass production? Is it niche production? And then also ideation from the beginning, you're thinking about ideas as you're learning more. So that's a little more upfront than execution, but it has to be happening, even though at the beginning, you're mostly focused on research. That's the biggest part of the wave. But then as you move through, you're not stopping researching. Even when you're fundamentally at ideation, you're also thinking more about the technical execution. And then even at the end, you're still doing research. You're still thinking of new creative ideas. So with this, it shows it's sort of a linear process, but it's much more cyclical. And that's what, these arrows are suggesting. So when we're talking about research, again, I'm going to go through case studies that hopefully becomes more apparent, but it's that empathy gathering. It's the project definition. It's learning as much as you can about what the competitors have done, what other industries have done, so you can have the most foundational idea. And again, from my perspective and how we compete. We like to say the fact that we've designed tea kettles and wheelchairs and watches and ceiling fans, no matter what we do, we're going to bring that experience and layer it on and transmute it from one area to another until we get into the hardcore ideation. I mean, we're always drawing. So we're thinking of ideas. Another thing that we do, some companies, there's like the research team who then hands it over to the design team, who then hands it over to the execution team. We're a small company. We don't have the luxury of that. But even if we did, we don't want that. We want our people, because one, it's more interesting to be involved throughout. You're making connections of like, oh, remember when we saw that person say this? What if we did that? It's really useful. And then it is the ideation and prototyping. You know, Mark Zuckerberg talks about, you know, fast failure and failing often. That's what you want to do. Is I would encourage you guys as you're going through this student project and taking it beyond that, do the work. You know, try it, do the sketches, build prototypes. You'll see some of the prototypes we make. They're cardboard, they're you know, plywood. They don't look anything like what they need to, but it's just like you got to get that idea, and it can't be hypothetical. Like put it down, whether it's on paper or even better in 3D, make it real so you'll see if it works or it doesn't work. Until you get into that cycle of implementation where it's, you know, pilot and launch and, you know, fine tuning it, and always through the filter of not what do I like, but what do consumers like? And as we go through that, I'll hopefully, you know, flesh that out for you a little bit more. So the first case study I'm going to walk us through is we were challenged to reinvent seated patient transport. So like, what does that mean? We got into this space because, as Brian alluded to, Michael Graves, for the last 12 years of his life, was paralyzed from the chest down. He had a meningitis-like condition, they described it. He had a sinus infection, and he didn't take his medicines right. He had a decongestant and an antibiotic. He actually traveled to that German trade show that the other guy had gone to, and he didn't take his medicine right. And this freak thing, somehow, the sinus infection penetrated his brain barrier and destroyed the myelin sheath around his spine. So his spinal cord wasn't severed, but the communication stopped working. He had the worst, he described it as root canal pain in my back. He called 911, went to a local Princeton hospital. They didn't know. They're like, oh, it's kidney stones, or maybe it's appendicitis. They started running tests. They were pumping him with morphine. And he's like, guys, I can't feel my feet. They're like, oh, that's good. That's just the pain medicine working. By the next morning, he was paralyzed from the chest down. He was rushed up to Columbia Presbyterian Hospital in New York, where someone was like, no, this is transverse myelitis. And he was paralyzed. And for 2 years, he was in and out of hospitals. This is him at the same rehab center in North Jersey where Christopher Reeve did his rehab. It's called Kessler. It's the best in the world. And this is actually a screenshot from CBS Sunday Morning interviewing Michael. And you just look at this place. You know, he's sitting on a bed with this lovely floral bedspread with a couch in front of it with a different floral pattern, and then a plaid curtain behind, surrounded by toilets. And, you know, Michael just had to accept, with paralysis, just all the indignity and the frustration that came. But then we approached Michael and said, you know, all we did at Target, we transformed retailing. We brought the democratization of design to housewares. That is so important. But what if we focused on healthcare and disability and aging and brought design to those areas? That could be even more powerful. So Michael was unique in that he was an architect, a designer, and a brand, but then he was a patient and became an advocate and a leader. So he got to speak at leading conferences. He was on the United States Access Board with a presidential appointment, thinking about universal design. And as Brian got to realize, he at first was reluctant. You know, he just wanted to get better. You know, he had the life. He traveled the world, staying in hotels that he designed, playing golf with presidents and professional golfers. And then all of a sudden, he was in a wheelchair. But then once he got over, okay, this is my new normal, he was like, I'm going to turn lemons into lemonade. And I'm going to make this a part of what we do. And it also helped that I brought to his attention the business opportunity. With baby boomers, they've got all the money. There's like 78 million of them, and they have different expectations from generations past. And they want style and functionality. They want consumer products in all that they do. And the other thing that helped is the caregivers, whether that's a spouse or oftentimes a adult child. I've got older parents now. I'm their caregivers. I help influence their decision making. It just represented a big business opportunity and a void in the market that no one was focused on. So we started to work in this space, and Michael had spent, like I said, 2 years in and out of hospitals. So we called Stryker and Hill-Rom, and we're like, we want to design a hospital bed. And we met with both, and Hill-Rom was like, and Stryker was like, oh, that's really cool. And it was great. It was the marketing manager. She was like a 35-year-old woman. She's like, wait a second, you're telling me Michael Graves' Target just called and wants to bring design to our category? We got to take this call, because her boss was an older guy and he had no idea who we were. But thank God Bobby Smith was like, no, we got to take that call. So we got to do a project where Stryker owns the bed. And they're like, maybe someday, but those take like 10 years to get through FDA clearance. We don't want to do that yet. And they also they own the stretcher. They also are, if you're a football fan, that horrible yellow product that gets rushed onto the football field when anyone's injured. They do that. And like the human-centered design that's into that product is astounding. It's amazing. But like, all right, they have that. But in the hospitals, this is what people still use, a wheelchair that was never designed to be in the hospital. So Stryker didn't sell that. So they realized we can do seated patient transport because we've got, the horizontal transport and the bed. We've got this credibility. And then the other data point they knew was that 30% of hospital wheelchairs were stolen every year. And why not? They're designed for people to be used at home. They fold up. They easily go into the trunk of a car. So that helps also to sell into hospitals when it turns out they're replacing their fleet every 3 years as they get stolen. And if you're going to steal a wheelchair, you're going to look for the good one. You're not going to steal the half broken one. So hospitals, it was a pain point for them. The other thing that we, helped realize through research, if you think about the technology from 1933, 90 years ago from today, or 80 years ago from when we designed this project, looks nothing like the technology of today. That is just so powerful, obviously. But the nursing from 90 years ago, when it was on wards, that had transformed into highly specialized care rooms. But that wheelchair that Everest and Jennings patented in 1933, this is literally from their patent filing, it's the same product that people were using. So it's one of those aha moments of like, this is clearly an overlooked idea. Another word I would encourage you guys to look for is product opportunity gap. So what are the products that consumers have a pain point that hasn't been filled? That's really what you should be focusing on, whether it's a software product or a finished, hard goods product. That's where the money is to be made, the product opportunity gaps. So what Stryker charged us to do was design a transport chair specifically for the hospital that's going to be revolutionary, because these wheelchairs were never designed for the hospital. And while they're used in the hospital, they're actually counter to what the hospital wants. So we said, okay. So we started to go through that process that I described. The first one was defining the project, defining the problem, and collecting details, collecting data. So, that starts with asking questions. Another thing, you realize the smartest people, the CEOs, they do a lot less talking. They do a lot more listening. And they do a lot more telling the answers, and they do a lot more asking the questions. And that's what you do. And you're a designer, you're asking a lot of questions. And we start with that benchmarking. So we say, what's out there on the world today? And you're looking at, wheelchairs, but then also other, ways, thinking about like rickshaws, they move people, baby strollers where there'd been a lot of innovation. shopping carts, they have wheels, they move stuff. You're just looking at the immediate direct competition, but then using your creative, think of what are other ways that people move either people or other goods in a wheeled manner. And then reading. One of the other, Michael is always asked, what's your piece of advice? And he just said, never stop reading. Michael's house was covered with books stacked up to the ceiling. So when you're getting into a new space, especially within the healthcare and medical space, you got to read. And we start to figure out about like spread of infection, how much of a problem that is, patient falls, how much of an issue that is, nurse injuries, that's huge. And all this stuff costs hospitals money. So we're starting, all right, let's think about that. How can we think about that as another design constraint that we can put into our project? And then the most important thing we do is ethnography. So that, I think do I define that later? Maybe not. But what that is, it is following people and observing. So again, you don't want to tell someone, this is how you should move a patient. We want to watch people do it, and you want to design products for how people actually live, not how you think they should. And the only way to do that is through observation. It's amazing. You could ask someone, what do you do? And people don't even know what they do. They'll tell you what they think, but when you watch people, it's a whole new world. So in this, we would have the marketing team, the engineering team, and the design team all involved. And in this case, we had the good fortune of being in the US and in Europe. We went to 40 different hospitals, and we just watched people. And with Stryker's, it's hard in the hospital, when you're doing consumer stuff, you can just products for home, you can get into people's homes, this with HIPAA. Unfortunately, Stryker had access. So we started to think about all of the stakeholders. So the escorts, the people that push people around, we had them wear pedometers, and they would walk 8 to 10 miles a day throughout the hospital, pushing people with chairs that were really meant for people to push themselves. So the handlebars have horrible ergonomics, and they bend over a ton all day to get those footrests out of the way. And they're getting into people's private areas. And they, these footrests that are tripping hazards. And then they've all these other gadgets like oxygen tanks. And you see these pockets that they jam your chart into. So we're always thinking about all of that. And the biggest complaint for the escorts was the grips are uncomfortable and I'm bending over all day. So okay, let's keep that down. And then the most important people are the patients. So, they're sitting in these often waiting for a test. There's horrible picture of people just being pushed up against the wall and having to sit there waiting for their test. Or that chart that I described gets pushed back in, and it's, uncomfortable all of a sudden because this is a vinyl seat that now has a hard back into it. And then think about when it's oftentimes the first and last experience that the patient has when they go to the hospital. And then this is a good photo here with that X-frame, and it is a vinyl seat. As those get older and they get stretched out, or just bigger people sit in them, you actually start sitting on the crossbar, really uncomfortable. So we knew, all right, we can make this a better experience for patients. And then who's buying it? It's the hospitals. So this is my partner, Rob, showing up. It's really easy to steal. We get it. We gave it back, but we were demonstrating or really testing, do they really get stolen that easily? And there's another thing that hospitals have. There's a survey, an HCAP survey, that's about your experience as a patient. And for federal Medicare, Medicaid reimbursement, it's tied to that survey. And a lot of it is what was your experience? So when you have these folded chairs that are uncomfortable with spray paint, it's not going to lead to a great experience of what was, not a good survey score. So all of those as the stakeholders, and then you got to map it out. So again, doing the work, this is just to show, as you're doing that research, you have to synthesize it, and you got to figure out how to make it graphic and make it organized so you can, in black are the issues and in blue are some of the ideas we're generating of how can we solve those things. And it's really important to keep it organized and put it down on paper or digitally so you can go back to reference it. And do it in different ways. And So this was first just about the product, but then it gets to the stakeholders. So the patient, we, are fun with our drawings, but, just showing all of those research in a way that summarizes the patient interaction. So you start to really go through the project, and as you're talking to manufacturers or marketing people or all the people that are like, no, 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 let's do it the way we've always done it, you can reference back to that research of like, oh no, yes, 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 the patients demand this. And so do the escorts. And so do, the maintenance staff. And what are all the accessories that are interacting with this? You just got to be visual and organized so you can really try, because as you're trying to do things differently, it is hard and no one wants to do it. And there's more risk. So you need to be able to back. Oh, the other thing, when you work with us and you've got clients, the people that take the risk and do it are the people that get promoted. Like Ron Johnson, who went over to Apple. So you have to have documented why you're doing this, because if it's your client or just your, if you're the entrepreneur, your vendor partner, you gotta be able to argue and reiterate why we're doing this, give it the reason to believe. And as you hire new people, you want them to know, like, this isn't just my idea, this was the research-driven experiences that we're trying to deliver on. In medical, you got to map out all the risks. And then again, when Michael talked about the experiences, you want to figure out who are all the stakeholders, because sometimes their interests are competing. So then it helps you identify who it is. So Stryker was our client. What did they need? The hospital is their client. What do they need? And then the patient, the transporter, the maintenance. What are all the goals that we're trying to do? So, I just can't express enough. Capture it, express it, and never stop referencing it as you're developing your products. And then when you're thinking about the benchmarking, you want to rate the competition. And then what do you think you can do to be best in class? And you're not going to necessarily be able to do everything, but how can you prioritize so you can really differentiate and figure out what's the price point and are we bringing enough value, and is there a reason to believe, is this really a market opportunity gap?
Hey, Ben, can you do me a favor?
Please.
I don't want to miss this point. One of the things that, again, that I remember is if you look at the purchase price of a Stryker Michael Graves transport chair, the initial purchase price is anywhere from 3 to 4 times of a cheap product. But the price of that chair through the lifetime of that chair is as little as 5 years, makes it less because of the because of the intelligent design and the intuitive design. They have the repair costs and these things, and their ability to explain that to the end consumer, which was the hospital or the clinics and things, was to their success. Because again, when I was amazed by when you took these things to market, I'm going into a place who buys things on price. Typically, right. The hospital only looks at price, having sold to hospitals for 30 years. And by showing them the probable cost of ownership and the total cost of ownership over a very short life cycle, which I think you guys used 5 years on average, that Yep. This was actually a more affordable chair, I thought was important. So I just didn't want to miss that. So as you're looking at your design for your product, your company, think about not just the initial price point, but also that, ownership periods of, 5 years, 10 years. How does it compare to what's out there today?
Yeah, Brian, great point. And even to take it further, it's this page that goes, because no one, when they're buying a wheelchair, is thinking about the cost of patient falls. But if you're a hospital and someone comes in for anything, cancer treatment, and they fall, the hospital, the insurance company is not going to pay for the hip replacement they now need. The hospital has to bear that cost. But if you point out you're going to have less patient falls, or you're going to have fewer nurses who are calling out sick because they're getting injured, then all of a sudden that wheelchair that is 5 times the cost of the competitor is a value proposition. And what was interesting, when Stryker first brought these to market, they were slow sellers that first year, because the hospitals had budgeted, we need 100 chairs at $250. So it's at 25,000. And our chairs were like $2,500. So that could only get them 10. So they couldn't make the purchase. But that next year, when they budgeted correctly for this and they had this whole value proposition, Stryker couldn't keep up with the demand, and it became the standard now in hospitals. But so it is thinking about the lifetime value and how does your product fit into other cost structures. And it became an expense from wheelchairs to became a capital investment, and it just transformed the way hospitals and Stryker thinks about this product. So Brian, yeah, thank you for pointing that out. So this was what we were trying to solve for. And then as we go through the process, this was what we went through a process. So first it's sketching. We draw. We start, a lot of kids today and for a long time have like been enamored by CAD, and it is so powerful, but I would encourage you to draw first. And if you don't believe me, you can read this article that Michael wrote about, and for the New York Times, about the lost art of drawing and how the connection between your mind and your hand works, and just the ideas that come from it. I just promise you. And we draw on iPads now. We use a program called Procreate, so it's still high tech, and we still draw on Post-it notes as well. But you can't get around the importance of drawing until you start with that model making. So this, we were showing how we're studying different wheel configurations. So we had 4 wheels or 6 wheels or 5 wheels, different grip configuration, different touch points, different armrests. And this is rough and tumble, but it's like, do these ideas that we were starting to sketch through, do they, if you sit down, does it resonate? Does it make sense? Until you get into CAD, obviously you can't get around it. It's super important. This is, the devil's in the details. We start to model, and then we start to think about the aesthetics. So we've got Strykers. We're doing a wheelchair that's going to be sold by the same people that sell the beds and the stretchers. And then we had also done patient room furniture that was branded Michael Graves, so we had to make it fit all together. So you start to think, how do we bring all that together? And then we start to do the engineering. So Strykers, they were an engineering company before we started working with them, and they brought design forward. But you start to do the engineering, and rather than our plywood prototypes, we're starting to really weld and starting to understand, real manufacturing constraints, until you can bring products out to back into those same places where we gathered the empathy and the information. Then we went back out and started to show them things. So we're showing them, different footrests and different pros and cons, and rough, these were junky things that we threw together, but they got to touch it, feel it, and really get a sense for it. And then it gets more refined to where, we've got, it's a little closer to, and then one of the big things, Stryker has this product called the Big Wheel, which comes from their beds and stretchers. And they're like, oh, you've got the Big Wheel. But one of the things that we realized was, in a normal wheelchair, it's got that huge wheel for people to self-ambulate. That was really bad for the spread of infection because the patient's moving it and they're touching every surface in the hospital. So while this wheel had that core Stryker branding, it was small enough that no one could touch it. So that really resonated with the end users. And I'm going to play another video that just shows kind of the questions we ask and getting that feedback. So it's not like for us, it's for the patients and the caregivers who have to interact with the patient. So hopefully this
inboard edge. I mean, do you
because of my heels.
would you want your feet closer together? I mean, do you feel uncomfortable with your feet that far apart, or?
I think that the patients are going to be much bigger than me. The bulk of them, their legs are going to be much wider, and I think they're going to be more comfortable on them.
So you don't see the way they're positioned now with that gap in the middle is okay for you? Okay.
I really like the space there to get out. That I like, because that other,
the other big, simple innovation there, if you go back and look at a typical wheelchair, those footrests are just always in place. And they are a nightmare of a trip hazard. And that's why those escorts were always bending down in people's private areas in their hospital gown to get those out of the way. So we said, what if we just have them spring-loaded so the default position is up and out of the way? And then you see this touch point Down here is like, and then that escort can use their foot. They don't have to bend over. So it's less bending for the clinician and less trip hazard for the patient. Because it's so funny, you watch patients, they're slow, they're exhausted until they're ready to get out and they're getting pushed to the car. Then they're hopping out of the wheelchair before the escort can get the footrest out of the way. So that's part of why the product is creating some of the risk. So that was a big insight that we had. And then the last thing we brought back was the third round of CPT, always refining it. It was finally in the end, which handlebar was going to be most comfortable. Was it kind of this way, or was it this other one that was a broader, rounder, more arcing one? Because we didn't know which people would like better. Until, you get the feedback. And then this ends up as the final design. We're fortunate it's co-branded Stryker Michael Graves. It solves all of these issues. And I'm going to stop talking because I've got a video that goes through all the
Prime
features and
TC is
benefits.
designed for the patient, caregiver, and hospital. For patients, the design is about comfort, fall prevention, and reduced exposure to infectious disease. Smaller back wheels are out of reach, so patients do not come in contact with any contaminants wheels can pick up throughout the hospital. The open design of the frame and spring-loaded footrests guarantee an unobstructed path to the seat. Stand-assist armrests aid in the ingress and egress by providing a touch point at the right height and position. The seat and seat back are contoured for maximum comfort for patients weighing up to 500 pounds. For caregivers, the Prime TC is about eliminating bending and reducing strain. Push handles are placed for optimal maneuverability. Brakes are foot-operated. Storage for key clinical equipment is integrated. Swing-away footrests and pivoting armrests provide unmatched access to the patient. 30% of wheelchairs are stolen every year from hospitals. Prime TC's non-folding frame discourages theft. The chairs nest for storage. The Prime TC is manufactured in the US and backed by a 5-year warranty.
So back to Brian's immediate point at the beginning, you can't say this is not a consumer product. Yeah, no one can buy it at home. Stryker won't even sell it to anyone at home. Some hospitals have sold them on eBay, people have bought them, but this is only sold into hospitals. But with all of the human touch points that go into it, it's clearly a consumer product the way we define it. So this just kind of repeats all of that. We can skip through it. But then again, to Brian's point, it's one thing to have a hypothesis. We think this is going to better control the spread of infection, but we actually proved it by testing it. And it was because of the lower wheels and the fact that it's not that vinyl that breaks, and it's designed to be cleaned and to be sanitized. So the data backed it up that it did actually reduce the spread of infection. It did reduce theft. Over the first year, there wasn't a single hospital that said one of these was stolen from them. And after that first year, it just blew away all sales expectations. So, it was really just a really satisfying case study. So again, I'm going to take a break. If there's any questions, comments, anything.
It's Fred here. I was interested in what part of the designing process does finance come into play? What part do you look into, how much is it if we make it this way? How much is it going to cost to manufacture, or if you choose another path, stuff like that?
The excellent question. And if you go back to think back to that slide where I had research, ideation, and implementation, you got to be thinking about it from the very beginning. But you really don't know. It's an evolving thing. When we first started the project, we had no idea that we could make an argument that it can reduce the patient falls and reduce spread of infection, which made it a lot easier to have a higher price point. But from the beginning, Stryker told us every bend of that steel costs $50. So you can't ever lose sight of price. And when we do products for retail, for home products, you always go back from the retail price, and then what is the margin requirement, and then what is the price, the manufacturing cost, and you're always evaluating it. There's something called value engineering, where you can't ever lose sight. If you sell a product that is great, but people aren't willing to pay for it, it's a product that isn't successful. And again, it goes back to that creativity and working with your factories to figure out, okay, I designed it like this, but you're saying that's really expensive. Can you help me understand what's making it expensive? And it's funny, they'll be like, oh, there's too many bends, or it's injection molded instead of stamped. And that's when you're always going to reevaluate and be creative. So I would say every project is different, but it is so core throughout the entire thing. And that's why I love product design, because I came from the business side, but my partners, they went to art school. And what I love about product design in particular, I say it's the intersection between art and commerce. It's not designed for design's sake. So you have to, bring all of the kind of touchy-feely, but then you have to have that, hard price points. So that's why when we do the research, when we talk about design, marketing, and engineering, the marketing and engineering team are really focused on the price point. Marketing, what can I sell it for? And engineering, what's it going to cost to make? And you can't lose sight of it. Good question. All right, so that's the heavy lifting of our process. I'm just going to go through a couple less detailed case studies, but that hopefully show how it is repeatable. So another project that we did for Stray was actually the one that preceded the wheelchair, was patient room furniture. And I showed a little sneak peek of that. And they wanted to have us help them get the attention of architects and interior designers. So if you're familiar with the Ford Explorer has like an Eddie Bauer edition where it's styled better, they were thinking that, but we wanted to expand the design brief. So our client had one thing, but we said, not only how can it look better, but how can it really improve healthcare outcomes? Again, for us, it's about that experience. How can it function better? So again, similar issues. It was the spread of infection. Don't look under any table really in a restaurant, like don't look, but this is a picture under an overbed table. Like it's kind of, you don't want to do that. And then all the trip hazards, you notice when you're thinking about it, and then, the back injuries with the nurses. So we said, like, can patient furniture improve these things? That's not intuitive. You wouldn't think it necessarily could, but we proved that it could. And, we did things like on the overbed table. So one of the hospital policies, anyone who goes from every room isn't supposed to touch anything. So the person that delivers lunch, if they come to your room and your overbed table is cluttered with your stuff, they're supposed to just leave and ask the nurse to clear the space. In reality, they don't. They push it aside. So we said, well, what if we use some intuitive form and material changes to teach the person, like, put your eyeglasses, put your big, cup of ice water over in this private zone, and they can tell you, keep this open so when the person comes to deliver your lunch, that's going to be open. Again, it's like a soft, intuitive way that the nursing staff can teach you how to help reinforce our infection control maneuvers. Other details that made it better. Another thing that was interesting, if you think about do I have a picture of, the typical nightstand? This is a great picture. Hospitals sold nightstands. They're like, all right, there's a bed, there's a nightstand. Your nightstand, if you think about it, goes against the wall because that's where your bed is. But when you're in a hospital, the bed is up, so the nightstand isn't against the wall, it's pulled out. So we said, all right, let's reimagine that as a product that has no front and back. It's a 360-degree product that no one's putting stuff in the drawers as much as they can because those drawers don't get cleaned. And no one wants to put stuff on the ground. So we had this surface where you can put your shoes or your bag. We put a bin that you can take your stuff home in a better way than that bad plastic bag. It got Stryker in the consumables business. So that's a great business opportunity to replenish those products. And then since it doesn't have a front or back, we put a two-way drawer so the someone in the bed can get access, but then the nurse can also get access to things with their family member. And then we also saw that there's never enough horizontal surfaces. So we had this one down on the bottom, a second one up here, a third one that's up higher above the grab rail. And then we had this charting surface for the nurse to say, like, this is my space. I'm gonna put it down, but then when I come in and I can put my tablet or, back in the day, my clipboard. So it's just, again, thinking about all of the ways that it's really getting used. And then the patient chair, they want to get you out of bed as soon as possible into a chair to prevent pneumonia. Because again, if you get pneumonia, the hospital is on the hook. No one's reimbursing them for that. But you've got sick patients with older nurses getting out and putting them into the chairs. So we put this detail that just looks like kind of a artistic move, but it's really designed to make it safer to have you sit down or stand up. So if you go either direction, starting over here, you sit down, you're able to touch it like we did on the wheelchair, more safely sit down. We used to use the term the grope and hope, where you would just fall into the chair if you think about the normal height of an armrest. And this just is a subtle way to make it safer. And then all of it together is just like a system that really makes for a better experience for the patient, for the visitors, for the nursing staff, for the food delivery team. It's easier to clean, just, a better experience. And I started with those because they're fun case studies, but it reinforced Brian's point of like everything is a consumer product. Then the last thing I've got here is actual consumer products. So we wanted to reinvent home healthcare because again, we saw those products at home, they're terrible. And like no one wants these things. And it's because people don't think about them as products that consumers are choosing. It's like products that the doctor says you have to get or Medicare sends you for free. So we took on all of these things that today make you feel terrible. And we said, how can we make products that make you feel uplifted? So same project, research going in. So this is where I define ethnography, the study and systematic recording of human cultures. That's what that means. So what does that mean as a researcher? You're going in and you're watching people. We started, why the heck does everyone put tennis balls on the back of a walker? And it's because like when you're older, it glides a little better, but it looks terrible. And now we all take it for granted, but we're like, all right, if we get to design a walker, how can we get rid of those stupid tennis balls? And, just all of these ideas of what people are saying. And then, you summarize that into what are their thoughts and feelings. So it's human-led design. And then it's the benchmarking. What are the price points? What are the features and benefits? And where on this point can we compete? So for that question about finance, you want to think like, what are my inherent costs? If you are maybe a startup and you don't have mass production, you're probably going to be on the more expensive side of things. So you got to make it really value added. Or if you're going to mass production and you have a a competitive advantage, maybe you're down here and you're not going to want to put as many features and benefits because you just want it to exceed expectations at the price point. Summarizing it, we also talk about design briefs. So answer the question, why are we doing this? Who are we doing it for? What are we doing? Where is it going to be sold? And when is the deadline? And then obviously cost. These are the things that keep the project on budget and on schedule. And these were the products that we brought to market via CVS. They're available today. They're called CVS Health by Michael Graves Design. And when you compare our assortment to the typical products, they work better, they look better, and they all have really cool innovation. I'm not going to go through all of them, but the raised toilet seat, this is, if you have hip surgery, it's really hard to get down when your knees go beyond 90 degrees. So you want to be up a little higher. But for those typical products like this one, they're so hard to get on. They're even harder to get off. They're disgusting. A lot of the time they require you to take the toilet seat off. So all of a sudden it's like one person's bathroom in the family. So we realized, like, what if we were inspired by quick clamps in the wood shop? where you just push a button and it pops open and you can clamp it on and they lock in place. And you can do it in a way that all of a sudden anyone can use it. And we designed it with a flat bottom so you can sit it on its side when it's not in use. And it's thinking about the form, we were inspired by like Japanese high-end toilets like Toto, and using the way the light reflects to make it feel more integrated and not additive. And we did this over and over, thinking about furniture. We made this have the metaphor of the seat cushion of a chair, but it's really the lid on the toilet seat. But again, if you go back to this one, it's like this toilet seat looks like a toilet seat. Ours looks like furniture because this is used by people either in a bathroom or in their living room or bedroom if they can't get to the bathroom. We hid the bucket. So on these normal ones, you see the bucket. It's humiliating for people. With ours, you can't see it because we have that waterfall over. So it's just adds dignity. It's just, again, this isn't like rocket science. This isn't even engineering where you got to do math. This is common sense and thinking about the empathy you gathered and how you can make it better for people. The wheels and the footrests. So the way we were able to get rid of the tennis balls, if anyone's ever seen a library stool, it's on wheels, it rolls around, then as soon as you stand on it, it levels out. And we're like, oh, that's cool. What if we did something like that, that it can glide easily, but then when you put your weight on it, it bottoms out, so you no longer need those tennis balls. So again, a simple thing that transforms how it works. And then we did these great folding canes that I won't go into all of the innovation, but what's great about it is it resonates with young people. MS is a condition that strikes people, a lot of young women in particular, and there's no products out that they feel identify with them. So we were looking at hydro flasks and like water bottles, you know, high end, what are the color palette, what is the finish, and how can we think about these as an accessory as opposed to just like a medical device? And then similarly, our non-folding cane, you see Marissa here, when you're standing up, we gave 2 touch points, so it's more easy to stand up from it. So again, just little things, or you can hang it over your arm or hang a bag over it. Because once you use a cane, you're down to one hand. So if you've got a cane and a bag and you're waiting in line, you've got no hands unless you can hang your bag on your cane. So again, just using it. And this, our designers had to sit in a wheelchair for a day, and they had to walk with a cane for a week. So not only are you getting the empathy from listening, but you're gathering it firsthand. And what is awesome, when you make products that are special, that are differentiated, the media loves it. They love positive stories, so you get free earned media, as it's known. So you're not just reliant on advertising, but people tell your story for you. And that's my whole presentation.
I miss you guys, man. No, this is fantastic. I hope you guys, if you have any questions or you want to type anything into the chat for later, if you have anything you want us to provide. But Ben, thank you. That was incredible. And I really appreciate you taking us through that.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. And whether, you know, we primarily do, as we call them, real products, you know, things that are made. But, you know, when you're thinking about digital products, it's the same thing. The beauty of that, the prototyping, you know, it's the MVP, the minimally viable product. That's all you got to build. And then you get it in front of people and then you pivot and get it. But it's that same thing. You got to listen, you got to iterate, and you got to improve. So whatever type of product you're doing, this process, you customize it for yourself. You know, Burger King and McDonald's have their own processes. They're similar but different. This is our process. And I would encourage you to learn from it, but then you make it your own. And that's what makes your company special and how you can compete with all the others. You don't have to be the only one. You got to be, you know, you don't have to be everything to everyone. You got to be something for a core group that, you know, you can get their attention and that they're big enough that they can, you can get that critical mass.
Bendis, John, first of all, awesome presentation, just awesome. You know, one of the great, this is partially an entrepreneurship class, partially a entrepreneurship and technology class. And the thing that comes up and strikes me, you know, having been around a long time, is the thing that's hardest sometimes to explain is that initial hypothesis, you know, of what you're doing and how do you start? So the hardest thing, I think, when you're young and you're all these phenomenal ideas, in your walkthrough, especially of that wheelchair, which you went into great detail, is an incredible experience, demonstration of the thinking that needs to go on, the research and the thinking and the pivoting and the testing and the molding of doing something. Too often we're told just to write a business plan, yeah, to some extent. And your thought from a very high level of how to get to an MVP. The other thing I'm big on MVPs because some people think the end point for everything versus, or don't think far enough that what someone's willing to buy, right, or pay for or whatnot. And you kind of did a great job. I mean, you did a phenomenal job when you broke it out sometimes on price points, the target versus, Gucci or whatnot. You were showing in that there may be minimal viable products for the same type of audience, a product, but different audiences, right? And I again, time and time again, when we teach entrepreneurship, it's always about, how do I do this, right? It's less about, they all have phenomenal ideas, right? But it's just, the thought, and I thought you did just a phenomenal job on that. So thanks so much. A lot of questions. Sometimes the students, they ask the questions after the camera's off.
Understood, and I'm happy to field any by email. The one thing I want to build on what you said is when you're getting started, if you think about the scientific method, and I am the furthest thing from a scientist, but you make a hypothesis and then you go through the process. And if you're a good scientist, you don't care if your hypothesis is right or wrong. You just hope you get to an answer. And that's why I think at the beginning is you want to just be asking questions. You've got some kernel of an idea. Obviously, you have to have some hypothesis, some thesis of like, I wonder if we could make a X. But then after that, like that's as far as you have to go. And then it's just start listing the questions. What are all the questions I can do? And then you get out and start asking those questions of people. And it's amazing how fast you can pivot. And there's so many amazing stories. I love the podcast, How I Built This, where they interview entrepreneurs. And so many of them are like, I set out to do this. And then the market told me I was actually solving a totally different problem. And I pivoted. One of the great examples of this is Slack, the platform that now everyone uses for communication. They were, I forget even what they were trying to build, some software program. And to do that internally, they built this communication product. And the first thing they made was totally failed, but everyone on their team loved this tool that they used. And someone was like, I think that's the product. And then all of a sudden they pivoted and went to this whole other thing. So I think to your point, you don't have to be right. You just have to kind of do it. And it's about just asking questions and doing the research, and don't be afraid to fail. And it's like, what are the exercises I can do to make myself do it? So we'll do like games we'll play and like brainstorming things just to like help facilitate that early questioning. So you're just moving down the thing. I think with the last thing I'll say is with a business plan, it doesn't have to be right. It's never going to be right. You just want to have a plan to give you some direction until you realize I'm wrong and I'm going to go in this other way. And then you refine.
And just to point out, Slack, as you said, was a mistake, failed at first, and then ultimately got caught on and became quite popular. Then Microsoft tried to crush it, whatever. I just want to point out, I forgot how many years they were doing it, but they were bought for $28 billion as a startup from a company called Salesforce.com. So not a bad miss.
And to that point, SaaS software as a service, right. It's has much better economics than trying to make products that, when you're wrong, they just don't sell and you got to scrap them. So definitely think about that as you're thinking your entrepreneurial.
The amazing part is they told them they were a failure, right? That's the,
Oh, yeah.
you as an entrepreneur, you get exposed to failure and criticism for failure all the time, and you have to be able to get back up in the morning and start over. Athletes are a lot that way also, right? You'll have a bad game, you have a bad round, Fred, or whatnot, and you got to get back up and figure out what I did wrong or whatnot, or just follow through, right? So,
And not being a solo founder, I think really helps.
Yeah.
Having someone with complementary skills, because it's hard. And then also being, part of the entrepreneur community and comparing notes, because it's problem solving and other people have faced those same problems. And when you're hearing no, it's so easy to get discouraged. But when you hear other people do it and then you finally get that yes, it's the most satisfying feeling. And that's what I think keeps us all going.
Fantastic.
Michael, Brian, we can't be more thankful for the time you've given us this today. And we hopefully will get you on campus one of these days to come visit us here at Avery University. Would love to put that welcome mat out at any time you like to come on, try some good old Southern cooking and meet some really, really cool students and administrators and stuff. So, but thank you so much for your time, Brian, again, for bringing us the gift.
Hey, listen, Ben and I haven't talked in a while. I reached out and he was on a cruise ship in the middle of an ocean somewhere. And, when he found out about the students and who it was for, he said yes in about 10 seconds. So it's really an honor to know him and his team. And I really can't thank you enough. I'm very grateful for this. And this is, again, guys, this is the fourth cornerstone. So next week, we're going to have Nancy Hensley is going to come on. She's going to talk about her time using all these cornerstones at Stats Perform as their chief product officer, and then her newest initiative in spending $100 million wisely, buying professional sports teams in the UK and Latin America. So I think it's going to be an exciting way to see how some of the free thinkers out in the field are pulling all these things together practically, and sometimes impractically. The thing I love about Ben and everybody is, Ben started out on Wall Street and he runs one of the largest, most well-known global design firms in the world, right? I started out as a biologist, right, working in the morgue, and I, got into technology and got to see the world through the lens of innovation and technology. So whatever path you're on, when you find that thing that gives you passion and you get up at 4 a.m. because you just can't wait to get to work, go do it. Whatever it is, it doesn't have to be the thing that you planned for, or whatever. And I hope that you guys are getting that from the stories that everybody's told you in the past month, and as we go forward. So
Great advice.
And that's the common theme between everybody you've heard from and will hear from in the future, right? We kind of have these non-traditional paths because we found something that we had a passion for, and that was more important than, Ben, you probably could have done really well at Wall Street, right? You would have knocked it out, and he'd be doing this from his yacht. But having that passion, that quality of life, and the meaningfulness in what you do every day is worth it, much more so, at least in my humble opinion. So
3 more.
All right, but thank you everybody for your time. Any other questions?
Have a round of applause.
All right, Ben, thank you. Fantastic. Really grateful, and look forward to catching up again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Good luck. Fantastic. Man, go blue. Yeah. She gets the bigger. Oh, that's right. So used to this thing. That's right. Get that straight.